Today on America's Test Kitchen, Julia shows Chris how to make a French onion and bacon tart with an easy pat in the pan crust. Then gadget guru Lisa McManus makes the case for electric wine openers. And finally, Bridget adapts a restaurant recipe for Spanish tortilla using a skillet. That's all right here on America's Test Kitchen.
You know, the kitchen is full of cliches like as slow as molasses, American as apple pie, and my favorite, real men don't eat quiche, and why not? Very often the crusts are really soggy and the filling is boring and overcooked. I mean, who wants to eat this? So let's go into the test kitchen with Julia and build a better quiche, a French onion bacon tart with a crispy bottom crust. I say quiche Lorraine and you think of something fancy, an expensive restaurant. Yep. Actually, it comes from a part of France that borders on Germany, and the word kuka, which means cake in German, eventually became quiche. It was cooked in a cast iron pan, no fancy edging or anything, so it was a pretty basic thing. Of course, there's quiche au saumon, camembert, Vosgienne, yeah, Alsacienne, lots of kinds of quiche. But we're going to focus on a French onion bacon tart, and they don't usually use onion in quiche Lorraine, but lots of versions of quiche do. So this is just a form of quiche.
That's true.
But a better form.
It's way better. Okay. All right, we're going to start by making the dough, and the first thing you want to do is prep your pan. If you have a dishwasher, you can do it right over the dishwasher, and the extra grease just gets washed away next time you turn it on.
Do you have to grease it first? I thought that was mostly for pies.
No, it helps to grease it first so the dough doesn't stick, and really you want clean slices coming out.
Okay.
A little extra insurance. And we tried lots of doughs. Classically, you make a pie dough, you roll it out, you drape it over, you fit it in. It's really kind of hard because these are sharp edges.
It cuts into the dough.
Yeah, unless you're really experienced, you wind up with these shreds and then you're doing the whole patchwork deal. What we want to do is a press-in crust. So this is 1 1/4 cup of all-purpose flour, a tablespoon of sugar, and this is a ½ teaspoon of salt. We're just gonna blend this together. All right, so far it's a lot like pie dough. Now we're gonna add chilled, cubed pieces of unsalted butter. This is a stick of butter, or 8 tablespoons. But this is where it starts to get a little different. We're gonna cut the butter in a lot more carefully so you don't have chunks of butter. When you make pie dough, you cut it in a lot less so you get some chunks.
And that long, flaky
That's right,
bits.
The chunks create flakes. We don't want flakes here.
Okay.
So it's about 15 pulses total to make this tart dough. All right, so at this point, we have where we would stop if we were making a pie dough. And you can see some of the butter pieces still pretty big. We're gonna continue to go for maybe 11 more pulses or so till that butter's much finer. And what happens is if you stopped now and you pat it in through the crust, where those spots where the butter would be big gaping holes. You wanna cut the butter in just more. So that was about 15 pulses. And now you can see all nice and finely done. Yep. And so this is what you're looking for when you wanna make a press-in tart dough.
So this is going to give you a shorter pastry,
That's
which
right.
means it's not long flakes. It tends to be not cookie-like, but closer to that texture.
That's right.
Okay.
So now we're gonna add the water, ice water, and this is another great trick if you have a gravy separator and then just cold water comes out with no chunks of ice. We're gonna start with 2 tablespoons of water, and instead of pulsing it in like you would if you're making pie dough, we're just gonna add it in the food processor and we're just gonna let it rip. So this is when you want to take a good look at the dough and see how it's clumping together. And you can see, I squish it, it makes great dough. Now, if it didn't do this, if you still had a lot of flour bits in your hand, you'd add another tablespoon of water and go another 5 seconds.
Okay.
And what we're gonna do is pull out pieces, kind of walnut-sized, and drop them into the pan. All right, so once you kind of got it spread into the pan, you just press it into an even layer. I mean, it couldn't be simpler.
This is a lot easier.
And you just want to take your time, make sure it's even.
Now, one would think you beat it up a fair amount in the food processor, and now you're pressing it into the pan, so this isn't going to overwork and make it tough, huh?
No, there's enough butter in there. There's enough fat. Now we're going to push it up the sides. And again, the greased pan really makes it easy to push the dough around inside. So I'm just making sure it's nice and even around the rim. And if you see a lot on one side, you can just pinch it off and press it in another location. Shore up any thin edges. And one other trick we have for getting it nice and even is to use plastic wrap. It really, you can go like this and get it nice and even.
Good tip.
All right, so there we have it, nice and flat. And to get the nice crisp edges, you just go around and pinch it off.
I would think if you also press the dough into the pan, it's much less likely to shrink when it's pre-baked.
Yep. There we have it. Take your time, press it in evenly, do the saran wrap trick, and make sure the edges are nice and tidy before you put it in the freezer. Putting it in the freezer first, make sure it won't shrink so much.
Okay.
Another trick, it's got a removable bottom. If you put your hand on the bottom right now, the dough's gonna come flying out.
Oh, I've never done that.
Oh, everybody's done it once. So put it on a plate, and then we're gonna put it into the freezer for 30 minutes.
Now this is the horror part of our show, which is to show you badly. This is the worst nightmare of anybody who pre-bakes tarts.
I've made those before.
Two of the problems is in these, they didn't press down the dough properly. So if you don't press down the sides or use one of these pat in the pan crusts, which are great, it'll tend to shrink. Also, they didn't let these pie crusts rest in the freezer. And the gluten relaxes and the dough relaxes, and it's much less likely to shrink.
Yep.
So the freezing method actually changes your life as far as pre-baking goes.
So now we're going to make the filling. Classically, it's simple custard studded with a ton of caramelized onions. And as like most things, we found a little bacon really helps the tart taste a little better.
Pork Product Central here at America's Test Kitchen.
I know. I love putting bacon in almost everything. So this is 4 slices of bacon, about 4 ounces. We cut the pieces kind of big, about 1/4 inch. You want to do it over medium heat. You don't want to slam it over high because then you'll get burnt edges and raw middles. Medium heat will make it nice and crisp throughout. I'm going to grab that frozen tart shell from the freezer, nice and firm. And while that bacon finishes cooking, we're going to put this guy in the oven. Foil, we're going to spray the foil with a little vegetable oil spray. That way it won't stick to the crust at all. Gently put the foil into the tart shell. That dough has been in the freezer for 30 minutes, so you're not going to ruin the sides or the edges very much. In go the pie weights, so that it doesn't slump down as it bakes in the oven. About 30 minutes, and it's at 375 degrees in the middle rack. And that's a long time. It's longer than a lot of recipes, but we find people take those pie weights out too soon, and then you still has time to slump. 30 minutes really means that dough is set and it's not going anywhere. So now I'm gonna use the bacon grease to cook the onions, really give it a little more of a savory flavor. So we're gonna spread the bacon out, paper towel lined plate. 2 tablespoons of the bacon fat. We're going to get that bacon fat a little hot. Now, in terms of onions, you want a lot of onions, almost a full 1.5 pounds. About 6 cups when it's sliced. How you slice the onions also makes a difference. Very often we like slicing them pole to pole because it looks pretty, but for this recipe, you want to slice them crosswise, 1/4 inch thick, because when you slice it crosswise, they break down a little bit more quickly. Getting soft textured onions is pretty important for this recipe.
Now what about type of onion? Does it matter what type?
Oh, oui.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah.
Was that the extent of your French, or did we now run out of the vocabulary?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, red onions made it this really dirty mauve color. It was quite disgusting. Sweet onions, like Walla Walla or Vidalia, made it too candy sweet. So your best bet are yellow or white onions. Okay. So into the fat.
Now that seems like a lot of onions for one quiche.
It does. It'll cook down.
Okay.
To this, we're going to add just a sprig of thyme, again, trying to bring it back to the savory side, and a little bit of salt. Now, believe it or not, we spent a lot of time figuring out the best way to caramelize onions for this dish. You do want them nice and soft, because you don't want crunchy onions in the custard. It's a little weird. But you don't want them too sweet. Brown, getting them brown makes them sweet. So the idea was to get them soft but not brown. And the trick then is to use a cover. All right, so it's been about 30 minutes, 10 minutes again on medium, and then after 10 minutes I went in, uncovered, stirred them around, turned the heat down to low. Went another 20 or so. You can see they're nice and soft, but not brown.
Pale.
Yep, pale, but very soft and intensely flavored because they really just steamed and stewed in their own juices. So we're gonna set this off heat and let it cool a little bit because we'll mix it with the custard. And now it's perfect time for us to go check on the pie tart. So you can see when you touch the tart dough, nice and dry, not gonna shrink anymore. Perfect time to take the pie weights out.
So if it wasn't ready, it would be soft and it would still be sort of damp. It'd be moist.
That's right.
Okay.
So we're gonna let that continue to bake for 5 or 10 minutes till it's nice and golden. She's a beauty, evenly done.
And there's no shrinking around the outside?
That's right. All right, so we're just gonna set that aside while we make our filling. Classic custard, obvious eggs and cream. Too many eggs, we found, it turned into rubber, and it's way too rich. 2 eggs, perfect amount. Just a little bit of dairy. Now we tried heavy cream, milk and half and half is the winner. So this is 1/2 cup of half and half, and a little bit of pepper, about 1/4 teaspoon. We're gonna whisk this together. And notice, it's a modest amount of custard. This is just enough custard to go in and around the onions to help them set. All right, well, if you'd like to add the onions, I want to just stir this together and make sure it's pretty evenly incorporated. All right, right into the warm tart shell. You just want to smooth it out. Make sure the onions are nice and evenly distributed throughout the tart. And the final sprinkling of bacon just on the top. All right, so back in the oven, same temperature that we par-baked the crust at, 375. So that's 20 to 25 minutes until the custard's cooked through and it feels firm in the center.
Meanwhile, Lisa is going to tell us a little bit about electric wine openers. It's not a joke.
Well, Chris, sometimes it seems that every gadget we go to test these days has gone electric. We have electric flour sifters, electric pepper mills, and here we have electric corkscrews. We found 3 different models priced between $19.99 and $39.99. All of them look pretty similar. They have a foil cutter tucked in somewhere in the base. You plug them in to charge them, and they're battery operated. But this is one time when we found that spending a little more gets you a better product. The cheapest one was loud. It tended to go in at an angle and jerk the bottle around. It wasn't very good. This one, by Waring, was our favorite. You just take it and place it over the bottle. This has a nice wide base so that it grips any bottle. And you just press the button. Travels down into the cork, back up again, and it's done. Oftentimes we don't like electric versions of things. We think the manual one does just fine. But this is one time when an electric corkscrew is a pretty good gadget.
All right, so it's been about 25 minutes. Oh, yeah. And you can tell it's done by just when you press on it, it's firm. That means the custard's set up and the eggs have set. So she's done. We're just going to let her cool for about 10 minutes before we slice in.
But you want to check it, too, a few times probably, just to make sure you don't overcook it.
That's right. Overcooked means rubbery, overcooked eggs. So it's been cooling for about 10 minutes, and now you can actually touch the sides of the tart pan.
Yep.
Which is pretty important because when you unmold it, again, removable tart pan sides.
You know, I have scars actually sometimes on my arm from hanging those down, yeah.
Yeah, so that's how you get the sides off. And then, of course, it's still on its tart pan bottom. If you really want to take it off the tart pan bottom, long, thin spatula, you just slide it underneath. Gives you a little leverage to pull it out. And you can see the crust is crisp all the way underneath the tart.
That is really good.
Oh, the flavor of the onions really just comes through. Just enriched with that little bit of custard. And the onions are soft. There's no crunchy bits.
So a great French onion bacon tart starts with a pat in the pan dough, oddly enough, cut in that butter, freeze it for 30 minutes, pre-bake it, and don't take that foil off until it's really set. And the filling was pretty simple, just a little half and half, couple eggs, lots of onions, long cooked but not browned, and some bacon, which was great. So there you have it, a very simple recipe for French onion bacon tart. Real men are gonna love it. I'm here at one of my favorite restaurants in the south end of Boston called Toro. It's a tapas eatery. And I'm here with the chef, Jamie, who's one of my favorite chefs in Boston. And one of the dishes I love that he makes all the time is called a Spanish tortilla.
So first we took some potatoes, we sliced them up. We're gonna put them into a warm pan, and then we are gonna cover them with olive oil. When you think there's enough oil, just add a little bit more. We're gonna do 7 eggs. That fits in these pans the best. And then we take a fork and just wanna beat them to break them apart. Then we take the potatoes out. We take a couple onions and we cook them down in a lot of olive oil, more olive oil than you could ever possibly imagine, until they're really tender. It takes a couple hours. So first we'll add our onions, and we're gonna add our potatoes. So we can take some of the oil that we had cooked in earlier, and we're going to load this pan up.
I was definitely thinking you didn't have enough olive oil with the eggs.
Safest thing to do is to pull that away from the heat. And when you dump it in, dump away from yourself. So if it does splatter, it splatters away. So we're gonna go for our first flip. There's gonna be oil that comes out, so I do it over. And slide it back in. After the first flip, if you push it, you can feel it's soft, like a rare steak. By the time it's done, it should be firm. You should push on it and feel like it's sturdy enough that it's gonna stand on its own. All right, so now this is ready to rest. We gotta let it sit for about 45 minutes to an hour to let the eggs set up. Otherwise, when you cut into it, it's gonna kind of run a little bit.
That is the best omelet frittata Spanish tortilla I ever had in my life. It's creamy, all that olive oil with the potatoes. It's phenomenal. So the only problem is, who's going to make this at home? You have to use, what, a gallon of olive oil, and you have to have a couple hours to cook those onions. So let's go to the test kitchen with Bridget and figure out how to take tapas to your table with less time and I think a little bit less oil, although it tastes great. Okay, we have our all-time best letter, from my perspective, from a viewer. You ready?
Sure.
I just love that man. They're talking about me, in case you weren't sure. Although I've been cooking for 43 years, he has taught me a lot. Can you give him a big hug and kiss for me? Evidently not. Okay.
That's great. All right. Well, besides the smooching, we're going to get down to some Spanish tortilla.
Is that what they call it?
That's what they call it. That's
it's been
right.
so long.
We're going to make a Spanish tortilla, and you saw one way to make it, the authentic way. We're going to make it in the home kitchen, and we're going to be a little bit more judicious with the oil that we use.
Yeah, this was the major obstacle.
Yes.
4 cups oil.
We want just to use a little bit so we can make this more often. But that choice had a major impact on the choice of potato that we wanted to use. Now, typically we were using russet potatoes because we found in lots of oil they cooked great. They became very creamy, and that's because in the lots of oil, they kind of fried. Think of a French fry, and the outside of the potato kind of formed this little shell, and inside they turned nice and creamy. Well, when we reduced the amount of oil, the russets, they fried on the bottom, they kind of steamed in parts, they were never really evenly cooking. And even worse, we had to continually stir them to get them to evenly cook. They fell apart. They were just too tender. So instead, we're going to use a Yukon Gold potato, which has a relatively high starch content similar to the russets, so they're going to turn creamy, but they're a little bit sturdier, so they can take a little bit more handling. And we're using 1.5 pounds of potatoes for this recipe, about 3 to 4 potatoes, depending on the size of them. We peeled them. I'm going to cut these, quarter them lengthwise, and then just slice them across into really thin 1/8 inch slices. We want these to cook very quickly as they can, and evenly.
By the way, while you're doing that, we have one other letter.
What does this one want me to do?
Now, this is about this recipe. And the person who writes says, I didn't see tortillas in the ingredient list. At what point was the tortilla to be placed in the pan? I may have missed something.
Tortilla, this is not a corn tortilla or a flour tortilla from Mexico. Tortilla to the Spanish means kind of similar to an omelet. That's right. And I should say as well, you don't want to cut your potatoes too far in advance. You don't want to hold them under water because that's going to release a lot of the starch away. We want the starch on the outside of these potatoes. So potatoes and onion are pretty classic combinations. So I've got here 1 small onion. So I'm just going to, again, cut it in half, peel the onion, just take off the root in here. I'm going to slice these very thinly, just pole to pole, into the bowl with the potatoes. And we're going to season everything together. I've got a 1/2 teaspoon of salt and a 1/4 teaspoon of black pepper. All right, so before I proceed with this, I want to show you the amount of oil that we're using for this recipe. This is it. And you can see this is quite the reduction from that quart of oil. All right, so this is 2 tablespoons of really good extra virgin olive oil. We want that flavor here. This is a 10-inch skillet. If you could turn the heat on to medium-high, we're going to heat that until the oil starts to shimmer. So in the meantime, I've got a 1/4 cup, again, of the extra virgin olive oil. I'm going to add that to this potato and onion and salt and pepper mixture. We're going to toss this well. What we want to do here is coat everything with the oil before it hits the pan, because again, we're not using a huge amount of oil over there. So we want to make sure that it's all evenly coated. All right, so we can see that our oil is starting to shimmer here. So it's time to add the potatoes and the onions. All goes in, packing it into this skillet.
I thought you just couldn't afford a bigger skillet.
No, this is the right size skillet for our tortilla. I'm going to cover it and turn it down to medium-low. I'm going to come back about every 5 minutes and give it a good stir, make sure that it's cooking evenly. And we're going to cook this until the potatoes are nice and tender. That cover's going to trap the steam in there and help the browning process slow down so that it can cook more evenly. In total time, this is going to take about 22 to 28 minutes. Well, you know, the potatoes still have a couple of minutes left. I did peek while you were gone. So it's time for us to talk about the eggs. What we found was that per 1.5 pounds of potatoes, 8 eggs was the right number. When we went up, they were too eggy. When we went down, there wasn't enough egg to hold.
It was too potato-y.
Well, no, there wasn't enough egg in there to hold it together in a cohesive mass. I'm going to add some salt in here, another 1/2 teaspoon. And we'll whisk this together. until it's just combined. We don't want to overbeat the eggs because that would make for a tough tortilla. All right, so that should do it.
So you just don't want to see any whites not mixed in properly.
That's right. So before we get to the potatoes, we took a ½ cup of jarred roasted red pepper, we rinsed it, we dried it, and we chopped it into ½ pieces, along with a ½ cup of frozen peas that we've thawed. It's a pretty traditional combination.
So now you've had your 2 side dishes.
I've got my vegetable.
Yeah, you're all set.
And my meal, that's right. I'm going to check on these potatoes. They look great. All right, you can see here, just slides right in and out, all right? We are ready to add this right into the egg mixture. And quickly just mix everything together. All right, so I'm gonna put the skillet right back over medium-high heat. So now I wanna add another teaspoon of extra virgin olive oil to the pan and bring it up to the point where it's smoking. So we're starting to see some smoke. It's time to add in our egg, potato, peppers, and peas. Yum. Instantly, it's starting to cook. So what I'm gonna do is shake the pan. I'm gonna keep it nice and loose and fold everything in for about 15 seconds.
So the only thing I'm thinking about right now is watching you get this out of the pan.
All right, well, let me press this into an even layer here. I'm gonna cover. Great, so I'm gonna reduce it down to medium heat and cook it covered until that bottom side of the egg gets nice and brown. That's gonna take about 2 minutes. I'll shake the pan every 30 seconds to make sure it stays released though. All right, let's take the top of the skillet off here. Looks great, but like you said, how do we get it out of the pan?
I've been waiting, yeah.
Just gonna pull it off of the flame here for a second. So what I'm gonna do here is use 2 plates. So I took my spatula, kind of ran it around, and flip it out onto this plate. Put another plate on top.
And now the exciting part.
Say my prayers.
Yeah.
And quickly flip it over.
Nicely done.
Thank you. Again, this is off the heat, so and slide that right back in there.
Well, I was kind of hoping you'd drop it or something, but...
So what I'm going to do is put this right back over medium heat, kind of tuck in the sides here. And we're going to let this second side get really nice and brown, just like this top. It's beautiful. That's going to take another 2 minutes over medium heat. All right, this one is done. And look at that.
It does look fabulous.
So we're going to let this cool. You want to let it cool about 15 minutes before you tuck in and let that re-solidify. This is kind of a denser texture than you're used to with an omelet.
So is it still cooking as it's sitting there?
Yeah, it is. It's creamy on the inside. It's setting up and it's finishing cooking a little bit. All right, so it's been a good 15 minutes. Let's tuck into this tortilla. Looks great.
Check, looks great. We got that part done. Now for the tasting.
All right.
Now, of course, traditionally, this would be served as a tapas in cubes.
That's right, little cubes. And there's some garlic mayonnaise there, too, which is pretty traditional accompaniment for this.
You actually get this recipe for garlic mayonnaise on our website.
Oh, very easy to make. But look how creamy those potatoes are. They look great.
Mmm. Boy, that is really good.
Mmm.
So the secret to a great Spanish tortilla is not using a lot of oil. We got exactly the same result. Nice creamy potatoes in a nonstick skillet covered. Onions and potatoes get pre-cooked. Then add the eggs, finish cooking, and flip it using the 2-plate method, which Bridget invented, I'm sure, right?
No, I'm not going to take credit.
And there you have it, a very simple recipe, but delicious for a fabulous Spanish tortilla. And no tortillas either.
Yeah.
How about that?
Mmm.